Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Story. The courtroom lights were blinding. I stood there, every metal on my uniform catching that cold, harsh glow, and I heard it. That laugh. Low, sharp, breathless. The kind that doesn't need to be loud to cut straight through bone. It was my father's laugh. And beside him, my mother let out that sigh. That same tired, practiced sigh she had been breathing out every single time I dared to stand taller than she thought I deserved to. She looked away from me. Right there in that courtroom in front of everyone, she looked away like she didn't know who I was. My name is Maya Reyes. Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes. And in that moment, standing under those lights with my shoulders straight and my chin up, I finally understood something I had been trying not to understand my whole life. I could serve. I could bleed. I could give every single piece of myself to something bigger than all of us. And they would still see the same little girl who tried too hard and never quite made it. They had no idea what was coming next. They had absolutely no idea who they were about to watch rise. So I said nothing. I kept walking. Because sometimes silence, real silence, the kind that comes from a place of absolute certainty, cuts so much deeper than any words ever could. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Because this story, it traveled through pain, through fire, through the kind of loneliness that doesn't go away just because you're standing in a room full of people. It traveled through the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that wears your own last name. And it ends somewhere I never expected it to. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to where this all truly began. 3 weeks before that courtroom went silent, I was standing in the backyard of my parents' house in San Diego. The music was too loud. The laughter was louder. The smell of charred meat hung in the air like it always did at every family gathering, thick and heavy, mixing with beer and old stories and the particular kind of pride that our family loved to wear like a costume. I had flown in from Hawaii that morning. I hadn't even had time to change. I was still wearing my dark navy uniform when I walked through that back gate. And I remember feeling it immediately, that familiar pull in my stomach, the one that always came when I came home. Not excitement. Not comfort. Something closer to bracing yourself. My father was at the grill, spatula in hand, holding court the way he always did, voice booming like a man who believed every word coming out of his mouth was scripture. He was talking about my cousin Daniel Reyes, the golden son, the one who had built his own company from nothing, landed a Navy contract worth millions, and somehow managed to make every family gathering feel like his personal award ceremony. Someone in the crowd, one of my aunts I think, called out over the music, asking what I had been up to lately. My father didn't even pause. She's in the Navy too. Some legal desk thing. Safe job. Good benefits. He flipped something on the grill. She's practical. Laughter moved through the crowd. Easy. Careless. The kind of laughter that doesn't even know it's hurting someone. I smiled. Small. Practiced. The smile I had been perfecting since I was about 11 years old. Daniel lifted his glass from across the yard, sunlight catching the silver of his watch. To family success, he announced, voice rich and warm, like a man making a toast at his own coronation. Everyone cheered. I looked at him standing there in his tailored gray suit, smiling that wide confident smile, and I felt something I didn't quite have a word for. Not jealousy. Not anger. Something colder. Something that felt almost like the beginning of a warning. And then my phone vibrated. I looked down at the screen. A security code. A flag. Project Sable Current. Contractor. Reyes Innovations LLC. Everything stopped. The music. The laughter. The smell of smoke and meat. All of it went completely still inside me like someone had pressed a button. Reyes Innovations. Daniel's company. My hand closed around the phone. I slid it back into my pocket. I lifted my glass with the other hand. I kept my face completely perfectly calm. But my hand was trembling. And the smoke suddenly didn't smell like a celebration anymore. It smelled like something burning that wasn't supposed to burn. Engagement break. If you're still with me right now, if you've ever been in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt completely alone, drop a heart in the comments. I need to know you're out there. Back at Pearl Harbor, the breeze outside was salt and heat and open sky. But inside the secured room where I worked there was none of that. Just still sterile air. Just the quiet hum of servers behind locked steel walls. Just monitors casting pale blue light across everything. I logged in. I opened the file marked Project Sable Current. And the data came up line by line, timestamps, coordinates, code strings, and each one of them was a pulse. A slow, terrible pulse. Like finding out something is very wrong with someone you love, and watching the numbers confirm it one by one. The Navy's sonar software had been rerouted, moved through a civilian server, and then sent on to a company registered overseas. I scrolled down, and there it was. Admiral Reyes. Ew. Reyes Innovations. I stared at his name on that screen for a long time. Then I kept scrolling. The source IP address wasn't random. It was from San Diego. The exact address of my parents' house. The house I had just been standing in 3 hours ago, holding a glass and smiling my practice smile while my father praised him. Daniel hadn't just stolen classified technology. He had used my grandfather's old engineering credentials, an account that should have been permanently closed years ago, to break into Navy systems. The same grandfather whose photograph sat on my parents' mantle. The man in uniform smiling. The man my father called our family's greatest pride. My grandfather's legacy, his name, his honor, had been used as a key to commit treason. My throat went so tight I could barely breathe. I sent the report to Defense Command. My hands were shaking the entire time. Not from fear. From something much heavier than fear. From knowing exactly what this was going to cost me. I leaned back and stared at the wall and heard my father's voice in my head, as clearly as if he were standing right behind me. Family protects family. That's how we survive. He was wrong. Survival built on silence isn't strength. It's rot. And I was done being part of it. The call came the next morning. My father's name lit up the screen, and before I even picked up, I already knew. I knew the tone. I knew the words. I had heard variations of them my whole life. His breathing was heavy when I answered. Impatient. Maya, listen. Daniel's in trouble. The Navy's investigating him for something ridiculous. You work there. Fix it. I pressed the phone against my ear and kept my voice very steady. It's not ridiculous, Dad. Don't start with that tone. He's family. Family protects family. Those words went through me like something cold. I thought about every time he had said them. Every time he used them to excuse something that should never have been excused. Every time my own achievements were called safe or practical while Daniel's were celebrated like miracles. When I earned my first commendation, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. When Daniel bought a new car, there was a toast. I breathed in slowly. I already am doing what's right, Dad. I ended the call. That night, a message came from Daniel. I know you're in the loop. Family should protect family. I sat on the edge of my bunk for a long time staring at those words. Then I looked up at my uniform hanging on the rack across the room. The dim light caught the silver on my shoulder. The only thing in my life that had never once let me down. The next morning, I was summoned to headquarters. Colonel Warren was waiting. A man with a face like carved stone. He held my file in one hand. Lieutenant Commander Reyes. Your name appears in the original investigation. Are you aware the suspect is your relative? Yes, sir. Then you know what that means. Yes, sir. The words came before the fear could. I'll recuse myself. I walked out with each step heavier than the one before it. In the hallway, my colleague Sofia Torres caught up to me, her voice low. They'll think you're hiding something. Let them, I said. I'd rather lose my seat than lose my integrity. The words tasted like steel. They were the truest thing I had ever said. And I knew they were going to cost me everything. And if you think recusing yourself was the end of Maya's fight, you have no idea what was coming. Because just when it seemed like the truth might be buried under politics and family loyalty and lawyers in expensive suits, something happened that none of them expected. Don't go anywhere. Part 2 is where everything changes. 3 days after stepping away from the case, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the data. The timestamps. The IP address from my parents' house. My grandfather's name attached to a crime he never could have imagined. I would lie there in the dark listening to the distant sound of the ocean and feel this ache in my chest that I couldn't name. Finally, on the third night, I got up. I pulled on my uniform and went back to the secure room. I wasn't there as a prosecutor anymore. I had stepped away from that. I was there as someone who simply needed to understand the full shape of what had happened. I logged in and followed the data trail again, slowly this time, carefully, and then I found it. A hidden access note buried deep beneath the official server logs. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Easy to overlook if you were moving fast. I wasn't moving fast. The source address matched my parents' home in San Diego. I traced the signal further, and what I found made me sit back in my chair and press my hand flat against the desk because I needed something solid under my fingers. Daniel had installed a physical relay device inside my parents' router. He had been in their home, the home where my grandfather's photograph still sat on the mantel, and he had planted equipment there. He had used it to route his intrusions through their network, through their address, so that if anyone ever traced it, the trail would lead to an old man who had already passed away and couldn't defend himself. He had hidden behind our grandfather's ghost. My eyes burned, not from the monitor light. I sat there in that cold, still room for a long time. Then I filed a supplemental report with the JAG office. Every detail, every line. That afternoon my phone rang. My mother. Her voice was shaking. Brooke. Maya. They came to the house. They searched everything. Your father is furious. They had to, Mom. It's evidence. Evidence against who? Against us? Against Daniel. Against whoever broke the law, Mom. A long pause. And then her voice dropped to almost nothing. Then it's against us, she whispered. The call ended. I sat alone with the salt air drifting through the small window, and that metallic taste settling on my tongue. The taste of a choice you know is right and wish you didn't have to make. Engagement break. I need you to stay with me here. Because I know some of you have been in this exact place. That moment when doing the right thing means standing completely alone. Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. 3 days later, the official notice arrived. Temporary suspension. Pending conflict of interest review. The story broke online within hours. My photograph appeared next to a headline I will never fully forget. Navy officer linked to family scandal. Not Navy officer exposes national security breach. Not decorated investigator uncovers classified data theft. Just linked to family scandal. Daniel's lawyers moved immediately. They filed a motion to dismiss the entire investigation on the grounds that the evidence had been gathered by a biased officer with a personal vendetta. And just like that, in the space of about 72 hours, I went from the person who had uncovered the breach to the person being blamed for it. The military went quiet. My family turned away completely. The press called me the traitor in uniform. And I sat in my quarters one evening with the rain coming down hard over Pearl Harbor, the water blurring everything outside my window, and I felt something I had never quite felt before. Not fear. Not anger. Exile. Not distance. Not separation. The specific hollow feeling of standing in the place where loyalty used to live and finding nothing there. I looked at my suspension order on the desk. My name printed in bold. Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes. Beneath it, the red seal of the Naval Legal Command. I signed the withdrawal form myself. Not because I wanted to, because the law demanded it. No officer shall prosecute a relative. It was the only shield I had left, even if it felt like paper in a storm. Integrity had kept me standing my whole life, but now it couldn't protect my name. The next morning, I went to Colonel Warren's office. He was standing by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, the gray shapes of warships barely visible in the harbor below. You did the right thing, he said. Doesn't feel like it, sir. He turned slightly. Right doesn't always feel right, Reyes. Sometimes it just holds the line. I left his office in silence. On the drive back, the radio was on and a voice filled the car with the particular cruelty of public commentary. Sources confirmed that a Navy officer related to the accused contractor was directly involved in the initial investigation. Questions arise tonight about bias and potential misconduct. They were talking about me. My own humiliation playing through the speakers of my car. That night, an email arrived from my father. 2 sentences. You just destroyed your cousin's life. Don't come home. I didn't reply. I closed the laptop. I turned toward the window and watched the waves strike the pier over and over, steady and relentless, each impact swallowed by the dark water and forgotten by everyone except the shore. The rhythm of something that keeps going whether anyone is watching or not. You think this is the lowest point? You think this is where Maya breaks? Part 3 is where everything you thought you knew about this story gets flipped upside down. Something happens in that next part that I still can barely believe. Keep watching. 3 days after the email from my father, a message arrived on official letterhead. Admiral Richland wanted to see me. I read it twice. Then I put it down on the desk and sat very still for a moment, because you learn in this profession that messages from admirals can go in almost any direction, and after everything that had happened in the past weeks, I was not in a position to assume anything good. I pressed my uniform that night until every crease was perfect. I polished my insignia until it reflected the lamplight back at me like a small mirror. If this was going to be the end, it was going to be a clean one. The next morning, I walked into Admiral Richland's office. He was at his desk with the case files spread open in front of him, reading in silence. He didn't look up immediately. He kept reading, turning pages slowly, deliberately, the way a man reads something he wants to understand completely before he speaks. Then he set the papers down. Lieutenant Commander, I've reviewed the defense motion in full. His voice was completely calm. They're attempting to discredit your investigation entirely. Yes, sir. I'm aware. They're building that argument on your recusal, calling it evidence of bias. He paused. Clever strategy. Doesn't change what the evidence says. He looked straight at me then. Steady. Unblinking. You're off the prosecution. But you are not off the record. You will testify. For a moment I genuinely could not breathe. Sir, you're calling me as a witness. You started this investigation, Reyes. You know every line of it. Every timestamp. Every access log. Every thread. He picked up the file again. The truth can only be defended by the person who found it. Something happened inside me in that moment. Something quiet but unmistakable. All the noise, the headlines, my father's email, my mother's whisper, Daniel's smug smile outside the courthouse, all of it went distant, like the volume being turned down on a world that had been too loud for too long. I stood at attention. Understood, Admiral. And for the first time in weeks I felt completely still. Engagement break. If Admiral Richland's words just gave you chills, if you've ever had one person believe in you when everyone else had turned away, put a star in the comments. Because those people matter more than they will ever know. The night before the trial, I sat at my desk with the Sable Current binder open in front of me. 200 pages. My handwriting. My notes. Months of work distilled into a document that now had to carry all of it. The truth, the cost. The reason I was sitting alone in my quarters the night before my own family sat down in a courtroom to watch my cousin beat a charge that I had built. My mother called. Her voice was soft. Unsteady. We'll be there tomorrow, Mija. To support Daniel. That's good, Mom, I said. You should be there. Everyone should see how justice works. A pause. Long and heavy. You've always been too serious, Maya. You don't understand what family is. I looked at the binder. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I understand it better than any of us wanted to. After she hung up, I opened the binder and began marking pages again. Red for evidence. Blue for procedure. Yellow for chain of custody records that were perfectly intact, perfectly documented, perfectly unbreakable. Each color was a wound that had been turned into a weapon. Each marked page was a reminder that every sacrifice I had made had meant something. When I finished, I placed my hand flat on the cover and sat there in the quiet. This time they were going to listen. Morning came hard and bright. The air shimmered with heat as I walked through the checkpoint gates. The sun hit my uniform and turned the fabric almost white, and I remember thinking it felt like armor. Not figuratively. Actually, like something solid between me and everything that was coming. Reporters were crowded at the courthouse entrance. Cameras flashing. Questions thrown through the air like objects. I moved through them without stopping, without reacting, and then I saw them. My family. My father, arms crossed, jaw set. The way it always was when he had already decided how something was going to go. My mother beside him, eyes down, twisting the hem of her dress. And Daniel. Tailored gray suit. Silver watch. That smile. Still. Even now. That wide, easy, completely unbothered smile. He stepped forward just enough for me to hear him clearly. Nice outfit, Commander. A small laugh. You're going to need it. I stopped. I looked directly at him. So will you? Then I walked past him. Slowly. Each step deliberate. The click of my heels against the stone an even steady sound. The calm before a storm that was already here. You just watched Maya walk into that courtroom. You just watched her look her cousin in the eye and not flinch. Part 4 is the moment everything breaks open. The testimony. The truth that filled that courtroom like cold steel and left absolutely no air for anyone to breathe. Do not stop now. This is the part the whole story has been building to. The courtroom lights at Pearl Harbor burned bright and absolute. I walked through those heavy wooden doors and every head turned, and the silence that fell was the kind that doesn't feel like emptiness. Feels like pressure. Like the room itself is holding its breath. My family was in the third row. My father, arms still crossed, face carved into that expression I had grown up trying and failing to soften. My mother staring at the floor, hands in her lap. And across the aisle at the defense table, Daniel sat with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with calm, polished confidence. The attorney rose immediately. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges. The evidence was gathered by a biased officer, Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes, who holds a personal vendetta against my client. The integrity of this entire investigation is compromised. Behind me I heard it. My father's laugh. Low, private, cruel. My mother's sigh followed it like an echo. I didn't turn around. Admiral Richland adjusted his glasses. He flipped through the report. Slowly. He turned pages the way he always did, like a man reading something he had already decided to understand completely. Then he stopped. Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes, you authored the original affidavit on Sable Current. Is that correct? Yes, sir. The room was completely still. And then Admiral Richland looked up from the file and his voice, when it came, was not loud. Didn't need to be. My God. The Sable Current investigation. We teach this case at the Naval War College. Gasps moved through the gallery like a wave. The defense attorney's face went pale. The polished confidence simply drained out of it. Richland's voice came again, sharper now. You are standing in this courtroom accusing one of the most methodically documented investigators this Navy has seen in a decade of incompetence? On the basis of a family relationship. Silence. Daniel at the defense table had gone completely still. That easy, confident posture simply collapsed inward. I watched it happen. My father's head moved. I could see it in my peripheral vision. That slow, uncertain lift of a man whose certainty is beginning to fail him. My mother covered her mouth. Richland held the file up. This report is not a scandal. This report is doctrine. The light caught my uniform. Somewhere behind me, I heard a sound I had never heard from my father before. Not a laugh. Not a sigh. Something broken and quiet that I didn't have a name for. Are you still breathing? Because I had to remind myself to breathe when I lived this. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, somewhere deep, share it with one person right now. One person who needs to hear that standing your ground is worth it. Send them this video. When they called me to the witness stand, the whole room shifted. I walked to the front with the Sable Current binder under my arm. I placed my hand on the Bible. I took the oath, my voice steady and unshaking, each word landing clearly in the quiet room. Then I spoke. I led the initial cyber forensic investigation. We traced a series of unauthorized data transfers originating from the Navy's secure network. The transfers were routed through a private cloud server registered to Reyes Innovations. The point of entry was accessed using the credentials of a retired engineer. I paused for just a moment. My late grandfather. Not one person in that room moved. I read from the binder. Timestamps. IP addresses. Server routes. The relay device installed in my parents' router. The overseas account. The exact dollar value of classified sonar technology transferred to a competitor government. Line by line. The truth filled that courtroom like something physical. Like cold air moving through a space that had been shut up for too long. When I finished, Admiral Richland leaned forward. Commander Reyes. Thank you. He turned. Please step down. Then he turned to face the defendant. Elias Daniel Reyes. The evidence presented before this court establishes an egregious, premeditated breach of national security. You are hereby found guilty on all counts. Two marshals moved forward from either side. The sound of handcuffs. That sound, clean, metallic, final, echoed once through the marble room and then disappeared into silence. Daniel's shoulders dropped. All of it dropped. The suit, the smile, the silver watch, the toast to family success. All of it fell away, and what was left was just a man in a chair with his hands being bound, looking at the floor. I turned toward my family. My mother was weeping, truly weeping, her hand pressed over her mouth and her whole body shaking with it. My father sat motionless. The arms that were always crossed had fallen. His eyes, which had always been hard and certain and quietly dismissive of everything I had ever done, were hollow. I had never seen that look on his face before. Not anger. Not pride. Not disappointment. Just the quiet, aching recognition of truth arriving too late. As I walked past the gallery, Colonel Warren rose from his seat. "Well done, Commander," he said softly. No handshake. No applause. Just a nod. Quiet, simple, and worth more than every loud praise I had never received. The silence that settled in that room was not painful. It was earned. But the story isn't over. Because what happened 1 year later, what Maya did with all of it, what arrived in the mail from San Diego, and what she said to a room full of young officers who didn't know they were looking at the person who had lived the very case they were studying, that is where this story finds its heart. Part 5. The final chapter. Don't you dare leave now. A year passed. The kind of year that doesn't feel like 12 months. The kind that feels like a complete life lived inside the space of one. I had been reassigned. New orders. A new role that I hadn't expected and hadn't asked for. One that felt, in the quiet, honest moments, like being trusted again. On a bright October morning, I walked into the lecture hall at the Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island. The air smelled of paper and polish, and something underneath both of those things, possibility maybe, the particular kind of clean that comes before something begins. 30 officers sat in crisp blue uniforms, faces turned toward the front, bright with that specific kind of eagerness that only exists before real experience arrives to complicate it. I set the sable current binder on the podium. I looked out at them, and I began. Today we are going to examine the legal and forensic framework of Operation Sable Current, which was designated a high-priority case in naval cyber law 3 years ago, and has since become part of the curriculum here and at the War College. I watched their faces. Curiosity. Recognition. The small shift of expression that comes when you realize you've studied something extensively, and are now sitting across from a version of it you weren't expecting. Most of them didn't know. Most of them had no idea that the woman standing at that podium with the binder they had read, cited, and argued over in their coursework was the same woman who had written it in a secured room at Pearl Harbor at 2 in the morning, hands shaking, knowing exactly what it was going to cost her. A young officer in the second row raised his hand. "Ma'am, what is the hardest part of doing what's right?" The room went very quiet. Not the courtroom kind of quiet. Something softer than that. Something that had room in it. I looked at him. Then I looked at all of them. 30 faces waiting. And I felt something shift inside me that I hadn't felt shift in a very long time. Not a wall coming down. Something more like a window opening. A small, careful thing. Being seen for who you truly are, I said. And understanding that sometimes it will only happen when you least expect it, in the last place you thought to look, by people who have no reason to see you at all. The room sat with that. So did I. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. After class, I walked back to my office. The afternoon light was long and golden through the window. The kind of late light that makes everything look like it's being remembered, rather than happening right now. On my desk was a small envelope. Faded. Slightly creased at the corners, as though it had been picked up and set back down more than once before finally being mailed. The return address was from San Diego. I recognized the handwriting before I even turned it over. Miguel Reyes. My father. I sat down. I held the envelope for a moment without opening it. Then I slid my finger under the seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper. A few lines written in the careful, slightly unsteady handwriting of a man who doesn't write letters. Who has never in my memory written a letter. We saw you on C-SPAN. We watched the whole thing. We are proud. We were wrong. That was all. 5 sentences. I read them once. I read them again. And what I felt was not what I expected to feel. There was no great rushing flood of relief or forgiveness, or the sudden healing of every wound those words might have been supposed to heal. It wasn't like that. It was stillness. Deep, honest, complicated stillness. The kind that comes when something you waited for a very long time finally arrives, and you realize that waiting for it was the thing that built you, not the arrival. I folded the letter. I placed it inside the sable current binder. I pressed archive on the screen. Outside the window, the Atlantic shimmered gold beneath the late afternoon sun. The light moved across the water in long, slow waves, and where it caught the surface, it turned the water bright, almost white, almost silver. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I thought about the backyard in San Diego, the smoke and the beer and the easy laughter and my father's voice calling my career safe. I thought about the cold blue light of the monitor at Pearl Harbor, and my grandfather's name on a screen attached to something it never should have been attached to. I thought about the sound of handcuffs echoing through a marble courtroom. I thought about my mother's face. I thought about 30 young officers sitting in a room, not knowing what they were looking at. I thought about the question from the second row. What is the hardest part of doing what's right? Being seen for who you are. I opened my eyes. The light was still on the water. Still moving. Still bright. And I understood, sitting there in that quiet office at the end of the longest year of my life, that I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had spent so many years standing in rooms where I was invisible, carrying medals that went unnoticed, earning commendations my father never looked up for, doing work that no one outside a secure room would ever be allowed to know about. And somewhere in all of that invisible work, in all of that unseen sacrifice, I had become exactly who I was meant to be. Not because anyone finally noticed, but because I never stopped. The last thing I did that evening before I left the office was look at my uniform hanging on the back of the door. The silver insignia caught the last of the light. Navy blue. Silver. The colors I had worn through every version of this story: the backyard barbecue, the secure room, the suspension order, the witness stand, the lecture hall, the letter from my father. I had worn it through all of it, and it had never once let me down. I turned off the lamp. I walked out into the evening, the salt air off the Atlantic cold and clean against my face. The kind of air that doesn't ask anything of you. That just is. That just keeps moving. And I kept moving too. Because that's what it means to hold the line. Not that you stop feeling the weight of it. Not that the people who should have seen you earlier suddenly arrive and make everything even. Not that the silence of the ones who doubted you ever fully fills in. But that you keep going anyway. That you choose the truth every single time, even when it costs you everything, even when it costs you home, even when the laugh follows you into a courtroom and the sigh echoes behind it. You keep going. Because somewhere 30 officers are reading your name in a binder. Because somewhere a young voice in the second row is going to ask the question that matters. Because somewhere a faded envelope is being picked up and set back down and picked up again. And because you specifically were built for exactly this. Not the easy version. The real one. That is Maya Reyes. That is the story of a woman who was told her whole life that she was the practical one, the safe one, the one who tried too hard and never quite landed where the golden ones landed, and who turned out to be the one they teach at the War College. If this story moves something in you today, if you've ever been the one who was overlooked, who did the right thing and paid for it, who stood in a room of people who were supposed to love you and felt completely alone, then this story was for you. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me your story. Because yours matters just as much as this one. And if you haven't already, subscribe. More stories are coming. Stories about people who held the line when holding it cost everything. You belong here.